But if you read that same poem on the page, it might not be as effective. So
which full is okay, page full or stage full?
I like to be both.
You have written one articles on the musician Ravi Shankar. Ravi Shankar for Ravi Shankar in New York Times in 2012. It has been like 14 years. So how did you write that articles and what made you write that?
Yeah, so it's my great curse and blessing to be named after the great Pandit who's passed away. And
Which job is tough job? Being writer or translator?
oh, wow. That's a good question.
You have been to Bhutan once, but
Yes.
you have written one book, and you made Nepal transit for your Bhutan travel.
Yeah.
And you have been to Nepal 4 times, you already told. So not a single book on Nepal, despite being 4 times.
What will it be hundreds of years from now? Who knows? But I think we need to take full advantage of what is happening online.
So you transitioned from dot pen to .com.
Yes, yeah. Who says the best way to become a writer is, he says, put your ass in the seat. Because honestly, if you sit and write every day for an hour.
So what are the poetic symbols that you want to read, that you want to hear from Nepal?
Well, I think what I'm not interested in is a kind of exoticized version of what it means to be Nepal. Sometimes you feel like you have to write about Everest and you have to write about the Monkey Temple, these landmarks, Swayambhuth. I'm more interested in the everyday life of what it's like to be Nepali. What are some of the difficulties you face and challenges?
Extreme Energy Drink.
Namaste, welcome. This is Birat Anupam, and today I'm so excited to have very interesting guest all the way from United States. He is Ravi Shankar. Make no mistake, he is not Ravi Shankar from spiritual side from South India. He belongs to the South India. His ancestral home is in South India, but he is not the spiritual guru of Sri Ravi Shankar. He is a very popular poet, a good translator, a good professor, and he has been to Nepal a couple of times, and he has written many books, and one of the books is on the Bhutan. So we'll be talking about poetry, we'll be talking about Nepal experience, transition, and everything. So sir, welcome to Shilapatra podcast.
Thank you so much. Namaste. It's wonderful to be here with you.
So what brings you here in Nepal?
Well, this is actually my 4th visit to Nepal.
4th visit.
Yes, and there is invited as a writer for the Himalayan Literature Festival, which is taking place over the next week. June 5th and 6th, I believe, will be open to everybody. And then I am traveling actually to Tashkent, to Uzbekistan. So I wanted especially to come. I love Nepal and Kathmandu. Nepalese hospitality is really something special. But because last time I was here, I took this trip on Drukgyal to Bhutan. And I spent a little time in Bhutan and published this book with acclaimed Indian writer and photographer Sudeep Sen. He contributed some photographs and some poems. And I wrote an essay about this mysterious mountainous nation trying to peer underneath the curtain of the happiest place on earth. So I wanted to promote that book on this visit especially.
So what was your imagination before coming to Nepal? So what you came to know after being here?
Yes.
4 times.
Well, I often, because India is so large, it kind of occupies so much space in the imagination. And so I only knew Nepal from a restaurant in Boston where they serve momos. And of course, everyone automatically assumes that Nepalese is about trekking, is about mountaineering. But in a matter of fact, I found that there's so much natural splendor. I spent time last time I was here in Pokhara. I went to Chitwan and saw the rhino. But also that the Nepalese people are very welcoming and compassionate. And it's one of the few places that you can see a Hindu temple next to a Buddhist stupa, next to a mosque, all in the same street. This is something that you don't find in a lot of places. It's a very syncretic culture, which I appreciate.
So in the introduction, I talk about two Ravi Shankar, one Ravi Shankar, and next Ravi Shankar. You are Ravi Shankar, and you have written one articles on the musician Ravi Shankar. Ravi Shankar for Ravi Shankar in New York Times in 2012. It has been like 14 years. So how did you write that articles, and what made you write that?
Yeah, so it's my great curse and blessing to be named after the great Pandit who's passed away, and of course the spiritual leader Sri Ravi Shankar. It was just a coincidence. Ravi in Sanskrit means sun, and I was born in Pongal, the festival of harvest. My parents weren't even musical fans, but growing up in America, he was one of the very few Indian musicians to penetrate the consciousness. So from when I was a little boy, people would ask me, "Oh, where's your sitar?" Or "Did you teach the Beatles at Woodstock? Where's Nora Jones, your daughter?" Sometimes making fun, sometimes thinking they were being very clever. And so I, from a very young age, wanted to grapple with this other identity. And I'm a writer myself. And so, in fact, I was meant to interview him a couple of times. Once he got ill, I did spend time with Anushka, his daughter. And so when he passed away, I wanted to write this. It's both an homage and a differentiation, Ravi Shankar and Ravi Shankar. And, you know, he was a global ambassador for the country. And he believed in hybridization, bringing together different kinds of music. And I see some of those impulses in my own work. So, but yes, it's a bit funny. I talk a little bit, I write about both the positive and negative things that have happened to me by sharing the name of this famous Indian musician.
And during the hippie era, Ravi Shankar was one of the symbols of inspiration for many hippie traveler. So, do you share something about that?
Yes, in fact, he taught George Harrison and the Beatles about Indian music, and then they came to study with the Maharishi as a result. Although, he was not a big believer in free love. The apocryphal story goes in Woodstock, he was supposed to play after Jimi Hendrix, the great American guitarist, and Jimi, at the end of his set, would always break his guitar on stage. And that was so insulting to Pandit Shankar that he almost didn't perform. He said, how can somebody treat their instrument, the divine vessel, in this fashion? So he was conservative in a lot of ways, but I think he ushered in this idea of what the Vedas, this ancient culture, has to offer to the West. Because a country like America, we're celebrating 250-year anniversary. On my way here, I've walked by trees that are much older than that. So it's a very new country, and I think that having these ideas and having a kind of a portal to connect to the ancient, beautiful culture here was part of his legacy.
So you have multiple identities. You are plural people,
Yes.
and you are poet, you are translator, you are professor, author, editor, so many titles. So if you have to pick one title for yourself, so which title would you pick that?
Oh, that's a great question. I would say I think of myself as a creator. So whether I've
Umbrella of
collaborated,
everything.
yes, collaborated with musicians, with visual artists, I've done a number of translation. In fact, and I'll leave you some announcement card, I founded one of the world's oldest electronic journals of the arts, Drunken Boat, and we just published a brand new issue that has work of art that can only appear online, special folio about A.K. Ramanujan, and also this idea of stateless people. So I think being pinned down into any one particular small genre or cubbyhole delimits you. I'm interested ultimately in human imagination and possibility, the nature of reality, and connecting. I mean, we were talking and you talked about how poetry connects you to people. And it is that thing, I think. It's the most ancient art form, predates written language. And there's something very primal, even in this era of movies, social media, TikTok, all of this stuff. The simple fact of a lyric poem sometimes can affect you in a much deeper way. And I've always found that.
So you are chairperson of the Asia Pacific Writers and Translators. And which job is tough job? Being writer or translator?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. The two are symbiotic. One feeds into the other. I think when you're a translator, sometimes it is quite tough because the author wants to convey certain things and it's a negotiation. How close to the letter are you? How close to the spirit? But of course, being a writer, I think is one of the most fulfilling and difficult tasks. When I finished my memoir, which took me 4 years, this book, Correctional, at the end, I almost felt like I ran a marathon. I was, almost sweating, and it felt like, wow, I've really accomplished something very difficult because so much of writing is rewriting, revision, the difficult work of getting feedback from your agent, from your editor, and then continuing to work on it. And like any sport, this is what I tell my students. They all want to become writers. They don't necessarily want to read or practice. And I tell them it's like wanting to play professional sport and you're not going to practice your free throws and you want to play in the NBA. Impossible. So, it takes a lot of study and time, I believe, for something kind of important. The way a diamond will form from sand after many centuries, right? You need that same kind of pressure and attention to create a meaningful work of literature.
I'm going to Bhutan and I have to talk about Bhutan topic with you because you have been to Bhutan once, but you have written one book and you made Nepal transit for your Bhutan travel.
Yeah.
And you have been to Nepal 4 times, you already told. So not a single book on Nepal, despite being 4 times, single book on Bhutan after one trip. So what is the book about?
Oh, yes.
And I'm very curious about the book project.
Yes. I had an old professor who said about China, and I think it's probably true about Nepal, that if you're in China for a week, you think you can write a book. If you're in China for a month, you think you can write an article. If you're in China for a year, you realize you can write nothing at all.
I also felt the same.
It's just, yeah. And so when I was in Bhutan, it was short, and I make this point in the introduction, I'm by no means an expert. There's some wonderful things you can watch, a documentary called The Agent of Happiness, where a government official is tracking the happiness of the local people. And yet, in this short time, I was really struck both by the ancient tradition and the rapid modernization, a country that only got the internet at the turn of the millennium. So very new, very young nation. They have this idea of gross national happiness, which I'm fascinated by, but I wanted to see, is this a real metric? Are people actually that happy? I found mixed results. They love the king. There's this pervasive sense of Buddhism, this protection of the environment. And yet unemployment is quite high. Many Bhutanese people are leaving. They expelled some Nepalese in the country that they don't talk about. So it's a very complicated story. And I was really struck, especially coming from the U.S., you find there are paintings of phalluses on the sides of buildings in a very conservative country. What is the history behind that? So I write a little bit about the divine madman, the monk who founded many of these temples, the bridge maker. And then I also visited an art school and found these Bhutanese practitioners of the traditional arts making carpets, making drawings. I found that, and then probably the highlight of the trip for me was climbing up to Tiger's Nest Monastery.
Tiger's Nest.
You should definitely do that.
Yeah, I'll be there.
Yes. And so, it's a 3-4 hour climb, 3,200 square feet. But once you're there, it's remarkable how something could have been built on the side of a cliff, almost like a bat would have had his cave there. And it takes a while to get up there, and there it's really quite tranquil and remote. And I found this really nice fusion of the modern and the ancient in Bhutan. And let's see, they're building a mindfulness city. There's a lot of vision and hope for the future.
In the Gelefu.
Yes, exactly. And yet Bhutan is they call it the yam between 2 boulders, right? China, India. And you have tiny Bhutan. So,
but the fun fact is that they have the borders with China, but they don't have the diplomatic relations with China.
Yes.
So it is very interesting.
It is very interesting. And in fact, I believe that the Chinese are making incursions into Bhutanese territory.
In Doklam, there was
a
issue.
Yeah.
And there was a stand-up between the Indian and Chinese troops.
Yes. Yeah.
So did people talk about this topic when you were in Bhutan?
No, I found that, and this was the interesting thing, because we had 2 tour guides, and they have to dress in the traditional Bhutanese attire, and they seem to genuinely love the king, almost treating him as a second incarnation of the Buddha. But they were not willing to talk very critically or openly about some of these things. But there was a sense of a little bit of fear of China, for sure.
And you have been to Bhutan from Nepal, right?
Just from Nepal.
So what are the parallels of Nepal and Bhutan?
Oh, wow. Well, and one thing, you should make sure you sit on the right side of the Druk flight so you can see the mountains when you go. So the one side will allow you that vision. I think part of the similarities are the terrain. There's this wonderful Himalayan landscape and the valley and this natural beauty, and yet Bhutan is, I think, quite a bit behind Nepal in terms of cosmopolitanism, culture. In Nepal, you can get great coffee, as I just got, and there seems to be this lively energy of young people, and Bhutan is catching up on that, but it still feels quite remote. It feels cut off in a lot of ways from much of the other things that exist in places like Kathmandu.
And both countries are Hindu-Buddhist majority. Nepal, Hindu majority, Buddhist second largest religion.
Yeah.
In Bhutan, Buddhist number one, second Hinduism.
Yeah,
So
that's
Hindu-Buddhist
right.
country.
Yeah.
So Bhutan is called Shangri-La, the Himalayan country,
Yeah.
and the another Himalayan nation, Nepal, is also there. So does Nepal have qualities to be called as the Shangri-La?
Well, I think the poet Coleridge and Kubla Khan kind of talked about this magical kingdom. People don't know whether it was in Bhutan, whether it was in Nepal. But I found, especially when you leave Kathmandu, when I went out to Pokhara, we're going to go to Nagarkot tomorrow, that there is this very special beauty that comes from both the terrain and the history and the language of the people. And I would say that there are many mysteries in Nepal that I still look forward to discovering. And so certainly there is a magical aspect to the country.
You are from South India. Your ancestral home is from South India, and the paper from South India, the Hindu has called you it calls you diaspora icon.
Yes, yeah.
So how did you gain that beautiful title?
Well, I grew up primarily in Northern Virginia in the United States, and then moved back to Coimbatore when I was a young boy to take care of my grandfather. And I think I was always interested. I went to graduate school at Columbia. I got my master's in literature. None of the writing I encountered was from Asia. And so, we talked about world poets, Polish poets, Italian poets, nothing really about India. And so it became part of my mission. And this was especially after I was living in New York City in 9/11. And I felt, of course, devastated as a New Yorker, and yet also doubly devastated because all of a sudden, Indians, any people who were brown, were being treated as potential terrorists. And so I thought this is the moment to try to humanize this side of the world. And so I was very interested in bringing Indian language poets into English. And actually one of the poets here at the festival, Tina Chang, Natalie Handel, a Palestinian poet, and I edited a big anthology for Norton called Language for a New Century. 450 poets writing from 61 different countries. And by doing that, I think I've worked pretty tirelessly. I'm on the board of the Indo-American Arts Council. I do some programming for the Poetry Society. And I often will try to bring in South Asian voices in some way. And I suppose there are not a lot of Indian American poets in the U.S., so I'm one of the more prominent ones. And I'm in touch with... I think there's a lot of depth in the Vedas. There's a lot of problems also, but I've always been interested in illuminating that and sharing that with people in the U.S. So that might be part of the reason.
So you talk about South Asia. So if you have to describe yourself in the diaspora, do you identify as a Indian or South Asian?
South Asian, yeah. I feel like, because in fact my parents would want me to identify as a Tamilian Brahmin, right? But for me, I feel a real kinship. I feel quite at home when I'm here in Kathmandu. I've traveled in Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, and there's something that kind of connects. It's very different than East Asia, of course. That's why that term Asian American seems a little bit broad to me when you're lumping together China, Vietnam, Laos with all of South Asia. But there, in any of these places, I can usually get a good roti, good chapati, dal. And then there's this kind of shared history. One of my projects, we'll see, I have many projects on the back burner, but is seeing how the Ramayana and the myth of Hanuman has changed in different places. In Sri Lanka, Hanuman is kind of the hero. So shared stories and narratives. So that's why I think of myself not just as Indian American, South Asian American.
So in the Western world, if you have to talk about the journalism, poetry, literature, translation, so what is the presence of South Asia? What is the presence of South Asian figures over there?
Yeah, thankfully, I think it's grown over the years, certainly, but it's still relatively few. So people point to someone like Salman Rushdie or Arundhati Roy, Jhumpa Lahiri, and say, oh, well, there's all of these South Asian writers being published. No, if you look actually at the actual figures, Asian American writers are still less than 1% of what's published in the U.S. So, but I think that there has been a bigger impression. A friend of mine, the poet Vijay Seshadri, first Indian American to win the Pulitzer Prize. There's another poet, Meena Alexander, who got to be pretty well known. So I think that it's starting to slowly change, just as it is in Hollywood. Now you're seeing more and more South Asian films that are perhaps being made. Unfortunately, we're stalled a little bit in America now. There's some forces that want to pull America backwards, but I don't think that's going to happen, because there is such richness in South Asian culture that that Americans are starting to really admire.
So you are the star of South Asian diaspora in the literary world of the United States. So if someone aspires to be something like you in the future, maybe if some guys from the Gen Z are watching you, and if they want to be something like you, so what are your suggestions for them to have their own mark in the United States?
Yes. Well, I think first of all, like I was saying before, to read widely and to be engaged, right? Politically engaged, but also engaged not just with your peers, but with all of the wealth of writers that have come before you, to perfect your craft. I think many of you probably already are quite capable on social media, but you need substance. It can't just be style. And then I think going to these kinds of events when there's an opportunity to meet an international writer, to come to say hello, and if you're able to do translation. So little of the work that's published in Europe and in the US is translated from Asian languages. So there's a real need for that. So if you're able to contribute in that way as well, and the wonderful thing about our digital era is you can connect now. You may be sitting in Nepal. You can send your poem to an editor at an American journal. And if you read that journal and you have a dialogue, you can slowly start to spread. And are there any literature writing programs in Nepal yet? Or?
Yeah.
They're starting to be. Yeah, so because, and I come from a generation where my father was an engineer. To study literature and humanities means you're a failure in other things. Now it's reversed. I actually read that the creative writing program was now getting more competitive than STEM fields. So I think that there is a real opportunity, but the thing is, you don't want to be derivative. I think this is probably subject of a whole nother show, but don't lean too heavily on AI. It could be perhaps be a tool, but your own voice, that's what we want to hear. Your own distinctive voice, specific memories that you can call forth, and using really precise language when you describe your world. That's what we're looking for.
So what are the ideas for the strong pitch for the poetry for the American journal or newspapers and publications?
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, if you're ever writing to an editor, you want to know the magazine. At Drunken Boat, I was also a reader for the Paris Review, a very famous literary journal, and you would be surprised. Some people send us Christian cowboy poetry. That's not going to find a home in the Paris Review. So to know the journal, and oftentimes editors like to know if you say, I really enjoyed this last issue and this piece in particular. I'm a young Nepali writer. I'm just starting out, but here's my short story. And to also have a very thick skin. As a writer, you get rejected a lot.
Yeah.
And which is fine. I had a poem that was rejected over 25 times, and then it won an award. I won $10,000 prize. Can you believe? Same poem.
Same poem.
So it's subjective. It's not qualitative in the way some of the other fields are. So to be persistent, I think, is really important as well. But look online. I encourage you to go to Drunken Boat, and you can reach out to me on the socials at Impurpler, and I would be happy to help point you in the right direction.
So the Drunken Board is very literary and poetic name, Drunken Board.
Yeah.
It seems like poetry itself. So how did you coin that name, and what is it about?
Oh, yes. In fact, there's a very famous poem by the French symbolist poet Arthur Rimbaud, passed away now. I think he's buried in Père Lachaise in France. He had a very famous poem called Le Bateau Ivre, the drunken boat, about this kind of voyage of ideas on the sea. And so this journal I founded when I was actually quite a young, the age of a Gen Z myself, in 1999 at Columbia. So it was one of the very first online magazines. And I founded it with a visual artist with the idea that online is different than print. So we wanted to, from the beginning, publish works of art that could only exist online. Digital media, hypertext, video, audio, locative media, alongside more traditional representations of art, poetry, prose. And over time, we've just published our 26th issue. We've published a lot of archival footage. I managed to get tapes of Norman Mailer, the great American writer, being interviewed by his biographer. I digitized those tapes and we published that. So it's a journal that's built on the idea that art should be accessible for everyone, should be egalitarian, but it should also be global in reach, and that when you encounter a work of art online or digitally, it's fundamentally different than reading it in a page. We don't want to have a journal that you could print out and it's the same thing. No, part of the experience is being immersed in the magazine and allowing the digital technology to change your reading experience in some way. So I especially encourage you to look at I'm really proud of this last issue, drunkenboat.com. We have a wonderful folio on the digital artists, statelessness, where we have artists actually from Tibet, Palestine, Rohingya, Uyghur, Badoon, Burkinabe, all of these groups that don't have sovereignty or nation state. And filmmakers, cartoonists, animators, visual artists, poets have contributed work. And then, as I mentioned, the great Indian poet, folklorist, translator, A.K. Ramanujan, his estate has provided us unprecedented access to his archives. So we have some new poems, drafts, so you can see all of that online. But I think it's exciting. A friend of mine who's also a professor said, and it's true, that we're in the infancy of this digital age. Think about when the printing press was first invented, and we're hundreds of years from that point. So what will it be hundreds of years from now? Who knows? But I think we need to take full advantage of what is happening online.
So you transitioned from dot pen to .com.
Yes, yeah.
So how was the experience in day one?
Yes, it's been great. And the Himalayan Literature Festival, if anyone has a chance to come, it features Tracy K. Smith, a good friend of mine, and Paul Muldoon, two Pulitzer Prize-winning poets, and a lot of young Nepali writers. The Prodigy Project has been helping out. I've been very impressed with them. Young and energetic and hungry. I sense a real hunger for connection and for knowledge here that I think is a really wonderful trait, actually.
So you are a poet yourself. So let us talk about poetry creation. So before you write poem, you have mind mapping. You should have imagination. So you have to translate that imagination into text. So how much percentage of imagination is reflected into your text?
Yes. For me, a poem is the fusion of music, intellect, and emotion, right? The mind, the heart, and the body have to come together in some way. And so I'm also a collector of language. So when I'm going, I have a small scrapbook and I overhear something or I see a sign and I just write it down. And then as you're working, you're turning these kind of phrases over in your mind, and you're thinking about how can I express myself in a poem, make it kind of memorable, and that's the thing. I believe a poem needs to be drafted a number of times, so you can kind of put it aside and come back to it, and then it sounds oracular, but really good poems tell you the shape they want to be in. So I also like poetic form. Some people don't like to write in rhyme. It's not very fashionable today, but I'm very interested in, especially I've been transliterating Asian poetic forms. Everyone in America knows haiku or ghazals, but they don't know about the many hundreds of forms that exist in the Vedas, the Pankti, many different kinds of forms. So I've been trying to bring some of those into poetry, but imagination is the number one thing, right? And because otherwise, what is the difference between a diary entry and a poem that you want to share with the world. And I think that you need to think about your audience, but you also need to think about how your experience is transformed in the crucible of your imagination into something more memorable. I mean, for me, poetry is a kind of spirituality. It creates a bridge between the visible and invisible world. And a lot of times, the most important thing is to slow down and to just quiet yourself, right? And this is maybe a little Buddhist, but we're all day long besieged by so many ideas, thoughts, worries, anxieties. Have this bill to pay, have this person to call. If you can let all of that drift away for a second and just settle in yourself, then you have this greater awareness and connection to the world around you. And I think that's really the source of all art. And that's the place where you can find really profound connections between ideas, between people, between the present and the future and the past. And that, for me, is the most fertile place for the imagination to grow.
In Nepal, many poets say that there are two types of poems. The first one is poem, and second one is claimed poems.
Tell me more. What is the difference? What's a claimed poem?
Claim is they are really not they are not written in poetic language.
Ah.
They are claimed poems.
Oh, I see. They're claiming to be a poet.
Yeah. So how to differentiate between normal expressions of emotions and the poetry?
Oh, yes.
Is there any line?
I do think that there's a line. It might be the line between sentiment and sentimentality, right? We all have sentiments and feelings. Sentimentality is when there's an excess of feeling for whatever it is that's being felt or described. And as an example, if you have a greeting card, I don't know if you have these greeting Hallmark cards we have in the US that has very cliched kind of emotion. Red as a rose, on the wings of a dove. These are all stale pieces of language that have been repeated so often that they lose value. So I think one of the characteristics of true poetry is it an original perception? Is it a metaphor that makes you open your eyes? Emily Dickinson used to say, if I feel like the top of my head has been taken off, I know that is poetry, right? So something that is not simply restating the obvious, but is kind of making some kind of new connection in language. So does it seem new to you? And then also there's real skill in crafting a poem. So maybe a claim poet would just be putting their ideas down on a page without any real attention to the line, to the stanza, to the form, to the momentum. Are you building to a climax? Are you using rhetorical devices appropriately? So I think probably the best barometers to read really fine poets, both from the past and being published today, and then to kind of compare what you're writing or reading to see. Is it up to that same level? I feel claim poets are a little too self-satisfied, or maybe they're not interested in poetry at all. They're interested in fame, attention. But the truth about poetry is it's a calling, and it's a very kind of deep connection that allows you to make meaning of the world. And it's not something that's just there for 5 seconds of fame.
Is poetry, task or event?
What or event?
Is poetry a task to do something, or it's an event?
Oh, yes. I think it's both. I mean, there is an element of labor. I have had certain poems that have arrived with a lightning bolt of inspiration, almost fully formed. Unfortunately, that's a great minority. Most poems, it's a labor. And I had another fiction writing friend, Tim Tomlinson, the director of the New York Writers Workshop, who says the best way to become a writer is, he says, put your ass in the seat. Because honestly, if you sit and write every day for an hour, something's going to happen. You may write a lot of bad stuff, but you need to go through that bad stuff to get to the actual thing. So to make it a habit, a pattern, that's the only way that you can start to develop as a writer and to find those truer poetic expressions. Sometimes it takes a second to go past all of our accumulated phrases to get to the really original stuff.
So in the age of machines and hyper connectivity, so how does poetry find its breathing space?
Yes, I think that's precisely why poetry is in many ways the antidote to all of those kinds of accelerated forms. And it's astonishing to me that people now want to use AI to write poetry, because poetry is fundamentally a human expression. I think it's part of what makes us human. I've read AI poetry, and I can usually tell because it's flattened out the complexity, the ambiguity, the contradictions, the surprises. All of those things are kind of flattened out. And so I think of poetry as a space that you can go to be quiet and to reflect and to examine, because outside the world is going 100 miles an hour. You know, what is popular today will not be popular tomorrow. But when you think of the timeless poets, from one of the contributors here has a new translation of Jayadeva's Gita Govinda, to Shakespeare, to Neruda, there's something that they're expressing that is more timeless. It's not just disposable. You know, it's not like something you buy in the store, you unwrap it, you eat it, and then you're done. Right, a good poem will stay with you and kind of live in your heart and in your mind, and those are the kind of poems I want to read and write.
In Nepal, many poets, they talk about the globalization of Nepali poetry. So what amounts to be a global poem? And do you have something like local poem, national poem, or international poem, something like that?
Yes. And I think, first of all, local poems being written in the native language, I think, is really important. Many people are very interested in the English language market. But in fact, poems in Nuwari, the Tamil poems that I've encountered when I've been in South India, those are more native. And I think I would not try to be too focused on what is popular globally or internationally, because that compromises our aesthetic vision. When you start writing towards an idea of what you think other people want to hear, you're not being as authentic or true to yourself. So there is such a thing. I mean, I think of local poets, and I think we'll have some shamans and storytellers at the HLF are preserving these really important elements of culture. And I think that if you do that really well, then you have a chance, in fact, to become a global poet. If you start out trying to be a global poet from the beginning, you usually will fail.
So how helpful the translation is for the globalization of poetry?
It's absolutely fundamental. I think that translation, that very word translate, in the Greek means to transport, to carry across, right? You're kind of like a metaphor. You're taking something, and I think that in the translation there's a loss and a gain. You lose something. There's certain idioms in Nepal. There's a music in Nepali that you probably can't get in English. What you can get, though, is a whole new audience and people and this is why I think poetry is so important to humanize us, because when you read a poem, you realize here are these people on the other side of the world. They have some of the same hopes and dreams as I do. We all live on the planet together. We're actually stewards of the planet, whether I'm American or Nepalese or Iranian or Palestinian, and that it behooves us to kind of work together. I think poetry has the power to do that. Yeah.
So you talk about humanize, the very beautiful word. So in the age of AI, so how to humanize our feelings? How to humanize that this is the authentic job, this is not supported by AI or something like that?
Yeah, and I'm a professor, so I'm running across this all the time. And rather than put my head in the sand like an ostrich, I know it's a tool, because my students tell me, you used to use Google, now AI is just the same. But the difference for me is if it's replacing your thought, it's not the same. If it's a tool, and I've used it as a tool myself, it can be really productive. But I think a really good antidote to that is to spend some time outside in the natural world. I mean, here you're surrounded by beautiful mountains and lakes, and that is an area that AI hasn't gone into. And then actual connections with people. So not just posting on a bulletin board or liking someone's post, but actually meeting someone and going out to lunch and having a conversation. Those actual intimate connections are the place that real poetry is born. And I think AI can be a tool, can be valuable, but we have to be very careful on how it's being used, because I think it has the possibility of replacing critical reasoning. And when you no longer are able to kind of conceive of and make arguments for yourself, and you're allowing a machine to do it, it could be a very slippery slope to a dangerous place.
So as a professor, how do you sense that your student is using AI or not?
Yes, I talked to the tech people, the IT people at Tufts, and they told me it's nearly impossible because the false positive rate is quite high. But one of the things I do in my class is we do in-class writing. So that's very easy comparatively. I mean, if something that you write in class is very different than your homework, then what's happened? And then I also believe in oral presentation, group work, where you actually have to be involved. But, I have a cousin who's worked, she works for Meta now, but worked with LLMs for a long, long time. And she said, now employers will all assume that something about AI, but what do you bring besides just that? Everybody has that access. So AI plus what? What is the original contribution that you can make? So I would say just use it as a tool. I don't like to use AI when I'm drafting at all, because I want my ideas to be fresh. And if you think about it, an AI is an algorithm, and it's simply recombining all of the different ideas that have existed. So it never perhaps will be truly original in that revolutionary way. That being said, it's getting a lot better.
So there are popular two terms in translation. The one lost in translation, another transcreations.
Yes.
So how is your experience with these two terms?
Yes. Well, I'll start with the last one first, transcreation, because in fact I engaged, I think, in an act. I translated the work of Andal, a wonderful 8th century Tamil poet and saint, the only female Alvar saint who apocryphally wrote all of her work before the age of about 13 or 14, and then she disappeared. They say that she married Krishna. And this book had only been translated in a very scholarly way, but her poems, the Tirupuvai, still are recited at South Indian weddings today. So me and this Indian poet, Priya Chabriya, worked on these translations, and my goal, they're bhakti poems, and they're intense emotion. I want them to come alive in contemporary American English idiom. So I made some changes, and I dropped some things. And then, in fact, Priya also translated the poems. She was in Goa at the time. I was in New York. And then we met 6 months later. Her translation is very different than mine. So we decided the book will include both of them. Included her translations and my translations of the same work that are very different, with the hope that you can almost get closer. So that's what I consider a transcreation, where you're, another great example is Rumi, one of the most popular poets now because of Coleman Barks' translation, and he made a lot of changes. Now the other side of that is lost in translation, because what is it that you lose? I think a lot of times you lose both the music. If something rhymes in Nepali and you're forcing it to rhyme in English, how can it have the same meaning, right? It's impossible. So other things, there are certain phrases or idioms. I also speak French, and we have in French a phrase, l'esprit d'escalier, the spirit of the staircase. Like after you leave a party, then you think of the perfect thing you should have said, the comeback, and it's too late. You're already leaving, and you said, oh, I should have said that. But there's no equivalent really in English. So you're going to lose those things. You're going to lose some of the original texture and meaning. But then, as I said, it's a gain. So if there's a transcreation, hopefully you're gaining this whole new vista and world in the new language. But I think of both of those things as a translator.
So you're a poet, you're a professor, you are editor. So my questions, if you have to judge a poet, if you have to give marks for the text and reading, so how much marks do you give for each section?
Yes.
To judge someone as a good poet or not so good poet?
ultimately, I mean, I think in my classes, and students like to say, stage versus page. Right? Are you a page poet or are you a stage poet? And I think my classes are much more meant for the page. Does it hold up when you reread it? Which is very different than kind of slam poetry, right? That's a performance and it's meant to be kind of in your face. It's meant to move you. But if you read that same poem on the page, it might not be as effective. So
which full is okay, page full or stage full?
I like to be both, you know. I think if you can be a page poet that also has a stage presence, that's the best possible way that you can do it. But this is the one thing I'm helping my students about too, is performing. Many of them are more anxious today, I think, than they used to be, to stand in front of people, to speak freely like me and you are speaking. This is a thing that makes them very afraid. So I have them practice, because I think poems are born of the breath in the body. They're meant to live in the air. And people at readings can hear them. And when they're in your voice, they can carry the meaning of a poem in a beautiful way. And that's why music is so important in a poem. But yes, my classes is more page than stage. But for my own presence, I hope I'm equal stage, equal page.
So do you follow poems and poets from Nepal?
Yes, in this anthology I mentioned to you, we had a handful of Nepalese poets, including Manjusri Thapa. So she was one of the first poets who I learned about. And then I've now found out much more about the history of poetry. Yutsu Sharma, the director of the Himalayan Lit Fest, is also a poet and translator. He's introduced me to some, but I'm always on the lookout for more. I want to find out much more, especially contemporary poets, and especially, and maybe this has changed, you can tell me, the last time I taught a writing workshop here in Kathmandu, it was all men. I was very surprised. In the U.S., creative writing classes is women usually. Here it was almost all men and 2 or 3 young ladies, and I think maybe now that's starting to shift. Is that true?
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe. Let's hope. Because, poetry is one of those places where I think there hopefully is equality. It's an open field for anyone to express themselves.
So as a poet and editor of a poetic journal, so what are the poetic symbols that you want to, read, that you want to hear from Nepal?
Well, I think what I'm not interested in is a kind of exoticized version of what it means to be Nepal. Sometimes you feel like you have to write about Everest and you have to write about the Monkey Temple, these landmarks, Swayambhuth. I'm more interested in the everyday life of what it's like to be Nepali. What are some of the difficulties you face and challenges? What are the things that you like to make at home in terms of food? What kind of music do you like? The actuality, and people think this is boring, but this is the granular kind of detail that makes any kind of writing come alive. So certainly some of your connection to spirituality, and also the history of Nepal is transforming so rapidly. So what does it mean to be Gen Z in this country? Is it hopeful? And what kinds of, I don't want the old symbols. I want new symbols.
New symbols.
New modes of expression that only the young can give us. These are things that I don't even know about that I want to learn from you.
You are excited to meet new poets in Himalayan Literature Festival, maybe.
Absolutely, yes. I think that there's a group of Nepali poets who will be performing, and I can't wait to hear them.
There was Gen Z movement in Nepal, September 8 and 9, 2025. So what are the things that you are curious about in poetry? From the Gen Zs, from the movement, from the people in the movement, and from the people observing that moment.
Yeah, the whole thing is very fascinating to me, but the fact that your new prime minister is a poet himself, someone who's a rapper, so clearly, and I think it's important if you look at, and this is why I'm a little scared about what's happening in America, because the administration doesn't want to support the arts. The greatest civilizations, the Enlightenment, always had a lot of investment in arts. I think when the arts in a country are flourishing, that's when you see the people are the happiest, the economic situation is the best. So I would love to see from the Gen Z what role did these poets and poems play? Did you use them in rallies? Did they help bring you together? What was it about? And I'm also very curious about how well coordinated it was, and the fact that over a couple of days, an entire nation can transform. I'm also
27 hours.
How many? 47 hours.
27 hours.
Wow, 27 hours. My true hope, of
The
course.
protest started on September 8, 11.
Yeah.
And the Prime Minister was thrown out of power at next day 2 p.m.
Yeah. See, this is unbelievable. I mean, when you have the military, you have the parliament, and yet this transformation were to happen. The important thing, I think, is to not let power corrupt. Because I think a lot of times we're very idealistic until we get into a situation where all of a sudden we're given power, and it's really easy to succumb to corruption. And I think, and hopefully it seems like the last time I went from Kathmandu to Pokhara, it took almost 9 hours. The road was through the mud. We had to push the bus. It was, and somebody told me that road has now been finished. But so these are the kinds of things
It has
that
been
Nepal
widened.
needs. It is?
Yeah, in most of the parts.
Most of the parts. Yeah. Investment in infrastructure, in education, in digital communication, putting money back, not into the pockets of the politicians, but into the mouths of the people, into the homes of the people. This is what truly will transform Nepal, and I think will make the current government very popular for a long time indeed.
So I finished my questions. Do you have anything to tell to the people watching this podcast?
Yes, this was a wonderful conversation. I've really enjoyed it. Halfway through my trip to Nepal, but I always discover something new. If you do manage to come to the Himalayan Literature Festival, please look me up, Ravi Shankar. You find me on the socials at Impurpler. And I just want to thank you for welcoming me with such hospitality.
Thank you so much.
Yes, my pleasure. Namaste.
That's all for now. Stay tuned, stay connected. We'll come up with next guest in the next episode. Thank you so much.
Shilapatra.